starting with Rachel McInerney, a first-year statistics PhD student in Maynooth University whose research focuses on using novel and improved statistical tools for fisheries management purposes. And Rachel has also been instrumental in helping put today together. So a big round of applause, please, for Rachel.
Thanks, Elaine, for that introduction. Hello, everyone. I hope you're all enjoying the conference so far. I certainly am. I'd just like to take a moment to thank my co-ambassadors for organising such a fantastic event. This is also my first talk as an academic, so I'm really glad that it's this conference that I'm speaking at. So I know I had an introduction from Elaine, but let me just introduce myself. My name is Rachel. I'm a first-year PhD student in statistics at Maynooth University, and today I'm going to speak about some of my work as a statistician so far. The first thing I'd like to do is acknowledge my project funding. So my research is funded by Research Ireland's Enterprise Partnership Scheme, and I'm working with the Canadian government, and specifically the Department of the Environment, Wildlife, Parks, and the fight against climate change. So I'm really grateful to have their support. I think this timing is kind of comedic following the panel and talking about how there's only funding for sustainable development goals, but I'm just going to continue regardless. So my work, we know by now that this conference is about the sustainable development goals, and my research aligns quite nicely with number 14, which is about life below water, conservation and sustainability. So I'm working with fisheries in particular, and my stance on it is that it's something important that needs to be addressed, and that's why there's funding for it, so that someone will take accountability. And then more specifically, target 14.4 talks about sustainable fishing, and it's kind of the essence of my work. So we're trying to implement management plans that have a really solid foundation that's based on a really solid scientific foundation, and then hopefully that will allow us to end overfishing. Before I get more into the detail about my research, I'd like to present you guys with this quote by Professor John Shepherd in 1978, who's pictured here, who said that managing fisheries is hard. It's like managing a forest in which the trees are invisible and keep moving around. So I do believe that monitoring fish is more difficult than other types of animals. And also, before we introduce any statistics or data science, we have quite a complex system at hand. I'm going to talk about some of the goals of my proposed research plan, but in reverse order. So this is future work, but I'm going to say it first because it helps the flow of my talk. So at a later stage, we're going to look at some population dynamics forecasting using these two tools. So capture-recapture techniques based on acoustic telemetry monitoring. What this involves is the fish are inserted with a transmitter, and there are receivers, as shown, deposited in different study areas in different regions, and in both lakes and rivers. And they can detect when a fish passes by. So this can help with the problem of knowing where the fish is at a certain point. But when they're not detected, it's still difficult to distinguish between migration and mortality. So there's still an issue at hand. And then also using Leslie matrices, which are mathematical models that take survival rates and fertility into account. So combined, they're quite a good way to estimate future abundances or predict future abundances. And then some things that I'm currently working on are assessing changes in these biodemographic components. So the first one is an abundance index called catch per unit of effort, and it's the average number of fish that are caught at a number of stations or sampling stations. So what my enterprise partners do, the fisheries biologists, to actually catch the fish, they use these U-shaped nets called beach scenes, and they drag them towards the shore. So that's one catch or one capture of the fish. Mortality rates, we use catch curves. So this is age frequency data. When they're plotted against each other, they have a decreasing relationship, and the slope of that, what's called the descending limb, is the instantaneous mortality, and then we can apply a transformation to get the total annual mortality. And then reproduction rates use another index that relates the length of the fish to how likely it is to reproduce. And one of my goals is to kind of create software that will allow the practitioners to do this analysis themselves. But we do believe that its use can extend beyond just fisheries analysis, and that any analysts that would like to look at count data or proportions, they could also use this, which is exciting. So the statistical models that we use to measure these changes are called Generalized Additive Models, which I'm sure some of you guys are familiar with. So they're machine learning models, and they're an extension of generalized linear models, and they're more favorable because of how flexible they are. So often in ecology, we have non-linear relationships, such as the simulated data that's shown, and GAMs can capture that or describe that relationship quite nicely. And they do that by using or fitting a smooth function to each predictor. So I've included the equation just because I thought it might be of interest, but you can feel free to ignore it if you wish. But this smooth function is made up of a spline, which is a piecewise polynomial. And again, it can just capture non-linearities quite well. We can also choose how wiggly we want our model to be, like how closely it's going to capture the data by choosing the number of basis dimensions. And you might think that, or it is possible that these models can overfit your data, but there is an inbuilt penalization for the wiggliness within some software that we've been using. Yes, so statistical modeling is kind of one part of my work, but also another key component is model adequacy assessment. So we completed a literature review in statistical ecology, and we found that there was no complete or consistent definition for model adequacy, and some people, like, there were conflicting ideas of what it actually meant. So myself, my supervisor, and another professor in Brazil wrote a theoretical review on model adequacy, or the concepts of model adequacy, goodness of fit, and model selection, which were spoken about today also. And this will be published later this year, which is very exciting. But we came up with this definition, which I hope captures the essence nicely. So we say that model adequacy is the extent to which a statistical model approximates the underlying data generating process and satisfies its assumptions, enabling valid and reliable inferences. So if I just go back to the formula here, there's no assumptions, or sorry, there are often assumptions associated with statistical models, but they aren't explicitly stated in the formula. And what can sometimes happen, software will allow a user to fit the model regardless of whether these assumptions are satisfied or not. So we think that it's really important to get results that we can trust to make sure that the models that we're using are adequate. And by that we mean they satisfy their assumptions. So just as an example, you might fit a Poisson model to some count data that you have, but when we do that, we assume equidispersion. So the mean of our data is equal to the variance, but often this is not the case. But if we use R or Python or whatever, we will still get estimates and we can still calculate fitted values, but these are not trustworthy. So I think it's really important in all areas to take this into consideration. One visual tool that we can use to assess model adequacy are these half-normal plots. So the open circles here are some sort of discrepancy metric between your observed data and the fitted values, so what your model estimates. And then how this plot is constructed, so we take our fitted model and we simulate new responses from it that like take the assumptions into account and the covariates and the model structure and so on. And then the models are refitted and the discrepancy metric is recalculated and sorted in ascending order. And then the bands that you see are they're the 2.5th and the 97.5th percentile, and the dotted line are the median values of these residuals or discrepancy metrics. You can choose what to apply. But how we interpret this is really nice and straightforward. So if all of the open circles fall within the bands, we can say that our data is a plausible realization of the model. So currently this is available in software, but it does not work for all models. So we've been advancing or developing this and trying to make it work for GAMs and other extensions. But I think this is a really nice way of visualizing it, and it was created by my supervisor. Just in line with the topic of today's conference and empowering women and so on, I just want to mention a research visit that I did in Norway. So I traveled at the end of May and I was working with these two PhD students, so Anne on the left-hand side and Ida on the right. Anne was working on sustainable development of golf greens. So she applied sustainable fertilization of golf greens. So she applied different pre-plant fertilizers and then measured lots of different things such as nitrogen leaching and the weight of the grass grown and so on. And they align quite nicely with some sustainable development goals that you can see here. And Ida was working on, or is still working on, the effects of climate change on species competition between plants and weeds. So again, we just heard from the panel discussion, especially from Marina and Anola, about the importance of climate change and how it's a pressing issue. But this is like a different perspective, which I think is quite nice. And then also some of the things that Mitra discussed earlier about ending hunger and so on. So with them, I'll wrap up shortly. With them, I helped them fit their models and also ensure that the models that they were using are adequate. And Julia kind of just mentioned this earlier when she was talking about reliable decision making and so on. But I really believe that this is the key of to tackle most, if not all, of the sustainable development goals. So I really urge you to make sure that the models that you're using in industry or in whatever application are in fact adequate. This is my incredible team. My supervisor is Dr. Morale, and I have a co-supervisor in Canada, Dr. Mankey, and then Iliana and Martin are fisheries biologists that have been helping us along the way. So thank you very much for listening.